Well, let's discuss some of the controversy around this law then with Michael Kelly, Professor of French at the University of Southampton in the UK. Good afternoon to you and thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. Pleased to be with you.
Let me ask you, first of all, a little bit about what we just heard there. You know, France's Prime Minister saying radical Islamism is an ideology that divides us and is designed to spread hatred and violence. I wonder, do you think the government has done enough here to draw the distinction between what it calls radical Islamism and the Muslim community at large?
I hesitate to comment directly on what the government should or shouldn't do, but I would say that it's important to distinguish between the extremist movements and the general population of Muslims, most of whom are law-abiding and patriotic citizens. But I do think there is a problem, which we have in all European countries, of extremists from the Muslim community. I think that one of the problems that we have is that we have, in our historic past, contributed to creating these movements. And I think we're finding it very difficult to cope with them within our own populations.
All right, well, let's talk a bit more then about that history that you allude to there. Like, are you referring to some of the things that happened here in France sort of at the end of the colonial period when suburbs were built around Paris that often housed people coming from France's former colonies, and that has led to a sort of sense of segregation? Is that what you're referring to? And if so, what should be done about that?
Well, that's certainly part of it. I think the ghettoization of Muslim communities is a problem that pretty much is shared by France and Britain. I think both France and Britain have a history of colonization in which both countries have done some fairly dreadful things to people in the Islamic majority colonies. And I think we're living with some of the consequences of that. There are obviously cultural issues in that immigrant communities do tend to group together and live together. And people from Islamic backgrounds do attach a very high level of importance to their community life. It's very difficult to find ways to bridge between those communities in ghettos and the mainstream community into which they've come.
Yeah, and you've made that comparison there between what's happened here in France and in the United Kingdom where you are. And I want to ask you a little more about that, because here in France, it is 115 years to the day since a law was passed here separating church and state. Now, those values are sort of absolutely essential to France. And, you know, perhaps more than that distinction exists in the UK. Would you agree?
I think we have a different view of religion. And I think that the issue of Islamic extremism in Britain is not really seen as a religious issue, as a community issue, a cultural issue, and certainly a political issue. But it's not linked to legislation over the status of religions. Whereas in France, I think the principle of laïcité has made a very firm connection between the status of religious organizations and fundamental values which all citizens need to follow.
Explain to us then, just for people perhaps not familiar with that French concept of laïcité, sometimes it's translated in English, or often is, as secularism. Is that what it means in your view? How would you explain the importance of it to France?
I don't think secularism is a very good one. It's difficult to find a better one. I like to use the notion of the lay principle, which means that the state is neutral in relation to religions and protects the freedom of conscience for people to be able to worship and believe as they wish, or indeed not to follow any religion at all. But in France, I think the laïcité principle has moved away from being a way of managing the relations between religions and the state, and is now moved very firmly into the area of national identity. And I think this has happened over a fairly short period of time, a couple of decades, I would say, because for a long time after the law of separation in 1905, laïcité was not a problem in France, or not a very serious one, whereas now it's become very much a focus for some of the most fundamental social issues that we all face.
Oh, all right, we are going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank you very much for your analysis as the conversations around that bill continue here in France. Michael Kelly from the University of Southampton, thank you very much indeed.